Good morning, everyone. Hope you're having a great day so far. We're going to be starting in just a couple minutes. All right. So it looks like it's 9:30 via my computer. So we're going to get started. Good morning, everyone. If you don't know me, I'm Marcia Lacco, the section chief for the Environmental Assistance section within DEQ's Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service. Welcome to day 2 of the ESI Conference. If you were able to join us yesterday, we had some great presentations, and if not, we will be posting those as soon as we can, and the rest of the event on our ESI website. And just as a reminder, let me advance to the next slide. Ooh, of course, it's the third slide. As a reminder, all of you are being brought in muted, just so we don't have any extra sounds. So if you'd use the question box to enter questions at any time during our presentations this morning, or if you want to wait till the end, raise your hand and we'll unmute you. You can ask your question verbally. If you have any issues, I know we had at least one yesterday with computer audio. Sometimes if nothing's working, log out and log back into GoToWebinar. Or if you've been on some other functional sharing software like Teams, ours will hijack that. So you just need to reset those in the audio tab in GoToWebinar. And your last ditch effort, if nothing else works, switch to your phone. When you do that and GoToWebinar, it'll give you the phone number and the webinar code. And once again, we want to thank Waste Reduction Partners and the Land to Sky for partnering with us and allowing us to use this GoToWebinar format. It makes it really great to do our webinars and our virtual conferences. Okay, all right. And with that, we're going to get the morning started off, and we welcome a couple of our staff members from the State Recycling Office to provide updates on recycling markets. Mike Green has been a business development specialist with DEQ's Recycling Business Assistance Center, better known as RBAC, since 2013, where he specializes in recycling markets. He spent 7 years prior to that with the City of Greensboro in the recycling program, and he helped them launch their ABC recycling service in 2008. And Mike is a graduate of Appalachian State University. Joining Mike this morning is Matt James, who also works in RBAC as a grant manager and a technical assistance provider for North Carolina's recycling industry. Matt has worked in the recycling industry since 2013 and has been with DEQ's recycling program since 2017. Matt received his master's in public administration in 2016, can't read my numbers this morning, from the UNC School of Government. So Matt and Mike, if you're ready, take it away.
I think we're good. Can everybody see the presentation screen?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Hey, good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Mike Green with North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality and the Recycling Business Assistance Center. My colleague Matt James and I are going to kind of give you some updates on the market for industrial recycling. A little bit about our group. So our group, we manage this recycling grant programs on the business side and on the local government side, and we coordinate the outreach efforts to build public commitment to recycling and to provide support to local recycling educational efforts. I would highly recommend anyone that is interested in recycling information, if you have a Facebook account, to follow Recycle Right NC. It's a fantastic group that gives a lot of updates and solves a lot of recycling mysteries for everybody. So I'm going to start off with some good news. Recycling markets are definitely looking up. There's been a statewide focus on contamination education that's been going on for about the past 2 years. The Southeast has a strong and growing domestic market. Recyclers and MRFs are investing in facilities and equipments. Our group has made grants available to help the recycling companies and the MRFs. New fiber processing will be online soon. There are dormant paper and cardboard plants that are being brought back online, as well as new paper and cardboard plants that are being built. There's new plastics processing that is on the way. We'll go into a little more detail on that, but Matt and I have both been talking with a lot of different companies that are looking at locating in North Carolina. With those improved markets, the demand for recyclable material will increase and pricing will improve. There's also a lot of advances in technology that are going to start providing a lot more recycling opportunities than we've had. So I just want to kind of show everybody the 5-year market trends. As you can see on the containers, your aluminum, your PET bottles, and your HDPE, they are all starting to increase. Fiber is doing the same thing. I do want to point out one real world example of market increase. If everybody sees in March of 2020, the office paper and the cardboard both had a spike. And if anybody can remember what was happening then, we were having a toilet paper shortage, and toilet paper, a lot of it is made from recycled material. So the value shot up during that time period. I thought that was kind of an interesting point to look at as it was happening in real time. So China has definitely been a topic of conversation over the past several years. In 2017, China announced efforts to clean up their country and filed some papers with the World Trade Organization. They banned unprocessed plastics in January of 2018 and banned mixed paper in January of 2018. Basically, what was happening is with the mixed plastic, there was so much unusable trash that it was polluting their country, making a big mess of everything, and it truly was not a healthy recycling system. So they basically just banned unprocessed material and raised the rate of acceptable contamination. So less than 0.5% contamination is currently allowed in their bales. So this is some of the good news in the past several years since the Chinese sword went into effect. We talked to the MRFs in North Carolina to see where the material was going. 33% of the material that goes into a MRF to be recycled stays in North Carolina to be made into something else. If you go from there, it's around 50% stays in North and South Carolina, and a little over 75% stays in the Southeast, with only 12% currently going to international markets. And basically, this is due to domestic processing that was not there before the Chinese sword, but is here now and is still growing and developing. So we made a quick map of some of the places in North Carolina that are manufacturing with recycled material. And as you can see, we've got a really healthy and robust domestic market that is working with recycled material in North Carolina. So when you're dealing with the items in your plant, so right now, we showed you some of the market value going up for recycling containers and for fiber, and a lot of that is more of the things that you would find in a residential program. The harder to recycle plastics, they are experiencing market improvements. It's not as big as the typical bottles and cans and container market, but the good news is that there is more improvement that is on the way. As the easy to recycle items trend up, the hard to recycle items start to trend up a little slower, but it is coming. So some of the problems that you may be looking at in your facility, market fluctuation, um, your problem materials may not be worth what they were pre-Chinese sword. It's still a bit of a buyer's market on the hard to recycle items. China is becoming less of an issue. I'm probably going to be a little braver than most and say that that is not the main issue we're dealing with now. I think our domestic market, there's enough in place and enough on the way that I am not really considering China the issue. Cost avoidance, your best case scenario is to find a cost neutral solution for your recyclable material, and it's very likely you will have to pay to have your hard to recycle material taken from you. So some more of the challenges, you'll likely need more than one recycling vendor. Um, they're looking at truckload quantities. That's really what they need to be able to make a viable market. Storage, most industrial facilities don't have the place to store truckload quantities, so that can be difficult. Um, One thing you may want to try and do, if you can find a recycler that would take mixed load to where you could have bales or gaylords of different kinds of plastic or fiber on the same truck. Sometimes I can help you get to truckload quantity quicker. And then there's communication and time challenges. Most of you, recycling not your only job. You're doing health and safety as well. You may be doing other things um, within the plant. But recycling could be a full-time job, and a lot of times there's just not the budget for it. The vendors may have a million questions. A lot of it may be harder to understand, or a lot of times vendors can be unresponsive. One of the unfortunate things I've seen is that if somebody is interested in the items you've got, they'll get back with you fairly quickly. If they're not interested, a lot of them will not extend the courtesy to say, we're really not interested. They just won't reply. So what do you need to be able to tell your recycling vendor? Um, so when you're calling someone to see if they can take your items, it's good to know, what item do you have? If you can identify the plastic type, if there are different layers in the material, if you can talk about the layers that are in it, how much do you have? What I usually do is ask somebody, how long does it take you to fill a Gaylord box with any given material? That will give your recycler a good idea of how much of an item you have. How frequently do you have it? If this is a one-time um, load of a certain material, it may be harder to recycle than something that you have on a continuous basis. How is it prepared? Are you baling it? Is it loose? Is it in super sacks? Is it in gaylords? And is the item free from contamination? Plastics, for instance, would go through a grinder. If there are nuts and bolts and metal tools and metal pieces in it, that can tear up the expensive plastic equipment. Um, I've seen people reject loads of good plastic because an industrial facility would have a history of having nuts and bolts and all kinds of weird stuff in with their plastic, and they'll be cut off. So one thing we do have available to kind of help you put this information together for a possible recycling vendor, we have a material information worksheet that you can fill out and include pictures. And it kind of puts you just kind of looking eye to eye with your vendor to see the best solution for the different items that you may have. All right, so what are some of the things that your recycling vendor would want you to know? Your plastics and your fiber may need more separation than before. So if you remember, the things that the Chinese markets cut off were these large mixed loads that had a lot of contamination in them. Um, Mixed loads typically mean heavy contamination. It's getting harder and harder to find someone who will take a mixed load of plastics or mixed loads of fiber. Um, Plastics that used to be sold in a mixed bale really need to be separated to be marketable. There's a lot less room for sorting errors, zero tolerance for contamination. So you've really got to make sure that you're working with your staff and your frontline employees to make sure that they are separating everything properly. So what did the main office need to know? Recycling is not free. Recycling should not be counted on as revenue. And recycling is a utility like power, water, and the internet. Um, we may get back to a time where the recycling markets are paying for the different plastics and the different fiber. They definitely may be paying more than they are now, but you really need to put that any money you're getting into recycling, put that back into your program and don't count that as revenue. I think it's really unfortunate that there are a lot of items in a plant that could be recycled, but there's a cost to it, and the plant is counting on recycling of a different item as part of their revenue stream when it really should go back into reducing the waste in the plant. So consolidation, um, when you have a lot of hard to recycle items, but you've got small quantities, if you can find other facilities in your area that have the same or similar items, um, you can start looking at different consolidation programs. So in Western North Carolina, Sierra Nevada and 9 of the different breweries in a 4-county region around them have put together a brewery waste consolidation. They all had the basic same waste. They had cardboard, they had polypropylene bags, they had plastic film, and they had aluminum or these foil mylar hops bags. Separately, there were no markets that were interested. They found a recycler in the area that was willing to consolidate everyone's common waste from that area, and they were able to find markets for it. The state was able to help that recycling company with a grant to make the brewery waste consolidation area successful. We were able to help them with some infrastructure and dock doors and some different things to basically make that program possible. So if you find, if you're an industrial park and you've got, different types of waste, I would highly recommend reaching out to some of your neighbors to see if they have similar waste. You may be able to get a better deal if you can work with the companies that are around you. So I will let Matt take over from this point.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I'm going to touch on a couple things from a 30,000 foot view, looking at some national trends and emerging technology. And at the kind of the end of this, I'm going to have a favor to ask of everyone on the call. So looking at some things that are happening nationally in the recycling industry, like Mike mentioned, the best news is that we have a lot more domestic capacity coming online, especially in the Southeast. So for decades, we were relying on overseas markets to prop up our recycling industry. That all changed about 3 years ago. We were forced to look at finding recycling markets in the States to service pretty much all of our recycling needs. And the market has really stepped up. In the Southeast specifically, we have new plastic recyclers coming online in Georgia and Tennessee. We have paper markets that are opening up in Virginia, South Carolina, Kentucky, some major expansions. I think it's going to be one of the largest mixed paper recyclers in the world is coming to Kentucky in the next 2 years. They're going to do like 500,000 tons per year of mixed paper and pulp. That's going to be the new Pratt facility. We have a company called Brightmark that's coming to Georgia. They're a new chemical recycler, and we have a lot of hopes behind them. So there's a big push to get new domestic recycling capacity that didn't exist 10 years ago, or at least not on this scale. Another major trend that we're seeing start to grow is the concept around legislation and recycling. How can legislators support the recycling industry by passing policies? And a major one that happened this summer is called extended producer responsibility. This is a concept that's existed in Canada since the early 2000s. It's been prevalent in Europe for a long time now. However, Maine and Oregon are the first two states to produce extended producer responsibility legislation. And an EPR is a system in which brands and manufacturers and producers of packaging materials pay to support the end-of-life management of the items that they create. So before, it was all on local governments to collect and process and dispose of cans and bottles and paper. Now, in Oregon and Maine, they have a system where producers basically pay into these organizations called producer responsibility organizations that help fund and manage the recycling and processing of the materials generated in their states. So this is a small trend right now, only in a couple states. However, there are several states that are looking at legislation that have EPR. North Carolina isn't one of those right now. We do have EPR for televisions, but it's not really on the horizon for packaging and printed paper right now. But it's just something to be aware of. Maybe take a look at the laws passed in Oregon and Maine. And another major trend that we're seeing nationwide, and maybe the best news, is brand commitments on recycled content. So we have brands like Coca-Cola and Pepsi. The Glass Packaging Institute are saying by 2030, they're going to have 50% recycled content in all of their packaging. That's a pretty big goal. That's a big pledge to make, especially right now as the content is more along the lines of 25% to 30%. But it's good to see that these retailers, these producers are saying, we're going to make a concerted effort to make our products with more recycled content. So the effect of that will be if more brands are demanding recycled plastic as opposed to virgin plastic, the price, in simple supply and demand, the price of recycled materials will grow, which will make it easier for local governments to justify keeping and expanding their recycling programs. You can go to the next slide. So along with those emerging policies and trends, we have some emerging technologies that are affecting and improving the recycling industry. Two plastic ones are chemical recycling and pyrolysis. These are not silver bullets that are going to save the day and make recycling easier forever. They are, however, two components that will help improve recycling capacity and help support the industry. So traditional recycling is done through a process called mechanical recycling, where especially with plastics, it's sorted either at the source or through a material recovery facility and then sent to a mechanical recycler who grinds the material down and pelletize it and turn it into a resin where it's then sold back into the process. Chemical recycling is different from mechanical recycling in that you basically take the recycled material and break it down into its actual polymer base through a complicated process I don't particularly fully understand, but it's you basically turn it into the polymer through gasification without oxygen. The benefit there is you can make a polymer which can then is basically the content is the same as virgin material, so it's high quality. And a big company coming to Georgia called Brightmark Recycling, or Brightmark, does chemical recycling, and they can even, in their process, they can take 1 through 7 plastics, so all types of resin, and they don't necessarily need to be source separated, they can be commingled, but they can break it down into their polymer and then sell that back into the recycling industry, really circular economy. Pyrolysis is similar to chemical recycling in that it's different from mechanical traditional recycling, but pyrolysis is basically making a plastic derived fuel that comes from recycled materials. And the third emerging technology I wanted to touch on was the growth of automation in our industry. It's common now to go visit a material recovery facility, and we have 15 in the state. A good, maybe a quarter of those now have a robot that is on their picking line sorting plastic types, fiber types, and as any automation, it can replace manual labor. That's a good and a bad thing. Of course, we want to have people have jobs, but with robotics, it helps facilities because it doesn't need health insurance, it's highly efficient, and it has a relatively quick return on investment. Of course, they're expensive at first, but they don't get injured. They can work 24 hours, with a little bit of maintenance here and there. So robotics will be more prevalent in recycling facilities that we see. Next slide. Okay, so here's where we're going to get into my ask, my favor that I have for everyone. So at the State Recycling Office, one of our big overarching missions is to collect data and generate reports about the recycling markets. What we do know is in that second line there, the total residential plastics recycled. We have a report that comes to us every year from all 652 municipalities and counties in the state of North Carolina. They tell us how many pounds of PET, HDPE, cardboard, glass, metal, construction and demolition waste, food waste, everything. They tell us exactly how many tons they've collected every year. So we have a really good grasp on the total residential plastics recycled. What we don't know, and what no one really knows anywhere, is the total industrial plastics recycled. We can only get estimations based on EPA data that are, big studies done across the country, and then we take that and we kind of break it down to North Carolina size. So we have a loose guess that there are about 200 million pounds recycled every year of plastic in North Carolina between our estimations on industrial recycling and our for sure knowledge on residential recycling. So we have this ballpark guess that we have 2.3 billion pounds of recycling plastic generated, and 2.1 billion pounds is available for recovery. These are really loose estimations. No one has this data, and we want to be the first state to have that competitive advantage of having solid data on the industrial recycling side of things. So if we can go to the next slide. So we put together a survey, and thank you to those of you that have already filled it out. But one of our goals is to attract recycling businesses to North Carolina that will then serve our industrial customers, like those of you on the call. It will make our job easier to attract those companies to North Carolina if we can say, hey, we actually have data on how much industrial plastics are out there. We know exactly what types of plastics, how much there is, and although we keep everyone confidential, with your permission, we can share which companies have certain amounts of plastic. So we've created this survey. It should take not very much time at all. It's 6 questions, and one of those is who are you? We're asking like how many gaylords, just loose estimations of how many gaylords per month, per year of each type of plastic, of cardboard, of paper does your company produce? And if we can get that data, we can then go to these companies we want to attract to North Carolina and say, this is what we have here. This is what's available for you to recycle in North Carolina. And then we keep everyone confidential. We won't share your data without permission. But then we could go to you and we could say, hey, company ABC, we see that you have X amount of PET. Is it okay with you if we share your contact with this potential recycler? And then that way we can open doors and make it much easier if we knew exactly how much plastic is available for each company. So I'm going to post this survey in the chat. Please, when you have a moment, take a look at it, during the break of the conference, during your lunch break, whenever. It shouldn't take very long, but it'll be crucial to help us help you. So that's kind of all I had prepared. Mike, if you want to show our contact information. Yeah, if you have any questions about the survey, if you're concerned about confidentiality or how we can manage this data, please, shoot me an email. I'm happy to, talk about data through a phone call, through email, however anyone wants to do it, whatever we can do to make a better estimation. It will really give our state a competitive advantage over others. So this is our email addresses, and I think Mike and I are available if anyone has any specific questions for us right now.
Thanks, guys. That was great. And we do have a couple of questions for you. And just a reminder to everybody else, feel free to type in your questions anytime, or if you want to ask a question out loud, go ahead and click the little hand raise button beside your name, and we'll unmute you, and you'll have to potentially unmute yourself, and you can ask it out loud. But we'll start with the couple we have typed in here. First of all, how would one get info on recycling plastic bags, mostly heavier plastic bags for covering products?
Basically, if you could send me information on how much you have and send me some pictures, give me a little more data on it, I'll be happy to see what I can find on that.
That's kind of the answer for a lot of those specific questions. If you know how much you've got, it helps us to be able to figure that out. And Mike is our go-to. We send him those questions all the time. So, all right. So the next question here is, how long is your survey going to be open, Matt?
It's going to be open forever and ever. However long it needs to be open to make it easy for people to respond. I understand that it may take a little time to gather the data if you don't already have it available of how many gaylords or bales of different types of plastic. I don't think it'll take anyone very long to get that, but I'll keep it open. It's been open for a year, so we've had about a couple dozen folks already respond, take a look at it, and thanks to everyone that has. But we'd love to get more information and make our job a lot easier.
Great, thanks. Does anybody else have any questions? Want to raise your hand and speak out loud, or type them in for me? All right. Does the state currently work with Nextrex for recycling plastic film and bags?
I'm not familiar with them. Do you know them, Matt?
So Trex is, I think, the overarching company there that makes composite lumber with like a decking material. I know Trex, they're based out of Virginia. That you can basically take film and combine it with wood in their process, and they make decking material that will last for a long time compared to normal wood. So yeah, we will send people their way. I've not heard Nextrex, but I have heard of Trex. There's another company in North Carolina called Fiberon that also makes composite lumber out of plastic film. So there's some good options there. So yeah, if someone's looking for connections, we can certainly make that if you email us.
Okay, I am not seeing any other questions.
So I was going to jump in and ask a question, Mike and Matt. So we're reaching out to our ESI members and those other entities that are interested in our events. Have you done any outreach through other manufacturing groups such as NCMA or the Chamber of Commerce?
We have done a little bit recently through North Carolina Economic Development, working
Okay.
through them. We're also the Carolina Plastic Recycling Association, CPRC, Carolina Plastic Recycling Coalition. We are working with them. But yeah, we do have several different regional groups, but not the chamber specifically.
Okay. Just trying to, if anyone else has any other ideas about trade associations you're in or something else that would help us get that info on industrial recycling, please put those in the chat box or the question box. That would be great.
Yeah, good suggestions, Marcia. Thank you.
All right, I'm still not seeing any additional questions or hand raises. So, oh, one popped in as I say that. Where do colleges and universities fall? Industrial or some other category?
They are their own separate category, and we actually have a staff member, Tara Natras, who specifically works with colleges, universities, community colleges. So feel free to reach out to me and I can connect you with Tara.
Thank you. And Matt just posted her email address in the chat box for you.
Even better.
Same with federal. So government entities that are not specifically recyclers.
Yeah, Tara also works with intergovernmental agency recycling. Yes.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Do you want those federal partners and universities to fill out your survey too, or do you just want to keep it industrial?
They have their own survey, actually. So Tara puts together a survey every year for colleges and universities. And
do the federal agencies get that survey?
Federal agencies, no. The EPA kind of runs federal agencies. We're more just state agencies. Yeah.
Okay. Should a federal agency that happens to be in North Carolina fill out the industrial survey then?
I'd say so.
So you
Yeah.
have the information? Because we have several large federal agencies in the state. So, I mean,
Yeah.
we've got EPA and NIHS out in the park. We've got the military bases.
Yeah, those would fall. I would say those would be industrial scale. So absolutely, they're welcome to take the survey.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
And anyone can, it's open for anyone. And you just put who you are, and then we'll know. Yeah, anyone can take it.
Awesome. All right.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay, I'll keep my eye open while I'm talking this time. So if you were with us yesterday, you know that just to make things easier on folks that are trying to pop in and out of sessions that they happen to be interested in, we're not just going to continue on with our next session. We're going to wait until the time that's on the agenda to start the next one. So you guys have a bit of a break. We will be back at 10:30 to hear from Jenny Patterson. She'll be talking about auditing hazardous waste vendors. This will be if you were with us at the zoo a couple years ago when we had her speak on this topic, it was really interesting. So I hope you guys will all come back and hear that presentation. Thank you, Mike and Matt. As always, you guys are very informative. Feel free to reach out to them or to us to connect you with them anytime. All right.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Angela.
You're permanent members of our agenda. So All right, we'll see everybody at 10:30.
Good morning, Jenny.
Good morning.
All right. If you want, we can do a little practice.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, we've got 15 minutes. So,
Thank you. I wasn't sure. I saw,
so let
didn't know if
me,
other attendees were in.
Yeah, and you guys are broadcasting live, so keep it clean.
Okay, thank you.
Jenny, I'm sending the controls to you.
Okay. Starting my camera. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hey.
Morning.
Good morning.
I need that. Why is my, oh, that wasn't me before. Okay. Hi, Jenny.
Oh, hello. Am I?
Yep, I see it in full presentation. Do you want to advance it 1 or 2 slides?
Yep.
Yep,
Looks
it's
good.
moving. Marsha, Angela, do we want to just keep Jenny's title page up there, or do you want me to send controls back to someone else?
No, you
Nope,
can
she's
keep
good.
Jenny.
Okay. And Jenny, I'll do a quick intro with you, and then it'll be even more seamless. I'll turn it over to you, and I'll leave my camera on for the intro, then I'll cut it off. So.
Sounds good. Let me, I'm gonna turn my camera off for a few minutes and then I'll
Sure.
be back with you.
Sounds
All right.
good.
Thank you.
I'll cut mine off for a bit too. So. Okay, hello and welcome back, everyone. Don Burke here, and now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Jenny Patterson, who is an environmental program consultant with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, Division of Waste Management, Hazardous Waste Section. She's worked with NCDEQ for 24 years. Now, the primary purpose of the Hazardous Waste Section is to ensure the proper and safe management and disposal of hazardous waste in North Carolina. Her presentation will cover the topic of performing due diligence on hazardous waste vendors and transporters. Jenny, it's great to have you back and to be part of the 2021 ESI Conference. And with that, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you, Don, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me this morning for this presentation. And we'll review, like Don said, we're going to review auditing waste vendors in this next session. Before we start, I'd like to thank the Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service Environmental Stewardship Initiative staff for organizing this great conference and for the invitation to present. I work a lot with Don Burke and Angela Barger and Marsha Lacko with Deeks on other projects. So a shout out to them for their time and effort on this and many other really worthwhile events where we get the opportunity to provide useful and timely information. So thank you so much. I'm going to switch over to the presentation, but I will be back to join you for the discussion and the questions at the end. All right, so here is my, whoops, here is my contact information. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions about this presentation. And a copy of this presentation is available to you as a handout. And please use that handout so you're not frantically writing notes down, because I'm going to provide you with lots of links and lots of information during this presentation. So this presentation, I'm backing up a bit. Let me start from the beginning. This presentation is a little different than the presentations I normally give. Usually I give presentations on hazardous waste regulations and requirements. This presentation is only about recommendations. Is it required to audit waste vendors? No. So there are no requirements to audit waste vendors. But is it a good idea to audit your waste vendor? Yes, absolutely. So in some way, shape, or form, it's a great idea to audit your waste vendors. Today, we're going to look at some aspects for auditing waste vendors. It's not always feasible to actually travel to their site. So we're going to explore some other ideas on how to audit without actually physically going to the site. However, going to the site is still one of the best ways to see if what you're being told actually matches up with what's actually happening. So that's kind of a theme throughout this presentation. The words and the actions need to match up. So many of you probably have tips for auditing vendors that I might not have thought of or considered. So please feel free, if it's okay with Don, please feel free to share your tips for auditing in the chat, or at the end, we're going to have a discussion and question and answer time. So that would also be a good time to provide these additional ideas that you have on auditing. Here's the hazardous waste section inspector map showing the regions and contact information for the inspectors. Please also feel free to contact your local hazardous waste inspector if you have questions or need any hazardous waste information. To make sure that you have the most up-to-date map, there's a link included at the bottom of this map. Occasionally, we do have some changes in staff. So if you don't leave with anything else today, here's probably the most useful information you can have, so you know someone to call if you have any hazardous waste questions. This Venn diagram represents the trifecta of most facility issues. So when a facility issue happens, it's typically one of these aspects that actually causes the problem. Often two or all of them come into play when a waste vendor has issues. So to set the tone for this presentation, we're going to take a look at some pictures, and the pictures are showcasing bad, if not worst case scenarios. This particular picture, the next few pictures are going to showcase a hazardous waste transporter that picked up hazardous waste from generators. Many of them were small colleges and universities. They were both in-state and out-of-state. And this waste was being placed in a public storage unit and stockpiled and consolidated until drums of waste were full, so that transporter could take them to the disposal company. In the middle of the night, the storage unit caught on fire, and this storage unit doesn't have power to it. So it's likely it wasn't caused by an electrical issue. It was caused by likely a reaction from the waste that was being stockpiled in this unit. So the repercussions were that the transporter was fined for operating as an unpermitted hazardous waste treatment, storage, and disposal facility. They were sued by the storage unit owners for damages, and then potentially they were sued for damaging all the other occupants. So this whole, the smoke and the fire burned so hot that the smoke went up in the rafters and it spread out throughout the storage unit. So the storage units immediately to the sides of this one had damage in them, but all of them had smoke damage. So this is what the inside of that storage unit looked like after it had burned. And then here's some of the materials that were recovered from the inside of the storage unit that had to be disposed of. So they were identified, what was identifiable was identified and then disposed of. On top of things, on top of using this public storage unit as a hazardous waste transfer facility, this hazardous waste transporter used our rental truck to transport hazardous waste. Now, it's okay to lease equipment as long as it's the proper equipment. And there are industrial leased trucks that are out there that are available for lease. But in this case, the rental truck was one of those household rental trucks, the kind that you would use to move your kids to their first apartment type of truck. The rental agreement specifically stated that hazardous materials could not be transported in this vehicle. There were repercussions in addition to the ones mentioned. The rental company was notified of the violation of the rental agreement, and DOT was also notified. So just make sure that if equipment is rented or leased, that it is being used properly for that sort of job that it's being used for. So here's another site in North Carolina. This one has a little bit of a complicated timeline, so I was just going to break it down for you. This is a site in Charlotte. It used to be called Detrex Corporation. They first obtained a RCRA hazardous waste permit in 1983, and they did some treatment of hazardous waste on site. It was a solvent distillation unit. Another company in January 2014 named Trex obtained ownership and assumed liability of the RCRA permit. Also in January 2014, a third party also operated at that site called Parts Cleaning Technology. They signed a contract with Trex that designated Parts Cleaning Technology as the entity solely responsible for the day-to-day management of permitted activities. So that included operation of the distillation system that treated hazardous waste on site. So that was in January 2014. In May 2014, Parts Cleaning Technology was directed by Trex to stop accepting hazardous waste. July 2014, Parts Cleaning Technology was evicted from the property by Trex. Parts Cleaning Technology employees were not allowed on site to perform activities that were required to maintain maintenance. February 2015, Trex notified the hazardous waste section they were no longer receiving hazardous waste. And then this happened. So this was on site. So there were 4 trailers, as you can see, outside of the property. And the Trex had been saying that these were empty. They actually had waste all in them. This first trailer, so the first trailer had about 117 containers of waste being stored in the trailer. The second one had 66 containers. The third one had 137 with 24 of them. They were actually generated from trucks during their distillation operations, and they were dated from 2011 to 2014. And then this fourth trailer had 137 containers. All of the containers within the trailer contained hazardous waste chloroform from one generator, and many of them were bulging and had excessive pressure on the containers. So violations documented included storage of hazardous waste in non-permitted storage areas, failure to minimize a potential fire, the potential for fire explosion and/or releases of hazardous waste, and failure to maintain waste with containers that are in good condition. So there were lots of bulging containers seen when those trailers were opened and also on site. A container of hazardous waste was discovered being stored in the trailer. Multiple hazardous waste containers were found in similar condition. Violations documented including the failure to minimize a potential for fire explosion and releases from hazardous waste, and failure to manage waste within containers in good condition. So there are lots of container issues. And then hazardous waste was found in the non-hazardous warehouse that had a date on it from 1995. So general condition and the containers that held this waste were not good. So as far as the repercussions, I'm going to talk about those, the repercussions for this site. But I just wanted to put this in perspective because it is worst case scenario of stuff that a generating site could have happened to them. So here are some suggestions. I've created a list of 10 suggestions that might be helpful as far as auditing waste vendors. One of them is to familiarize yourself with requirements that apply to that vendor. And I know it seems unfair that the generating site needs to become an expert in all of the management of their waste beyond their facility, but it is what could possibly keep that generating site from having penalties. So remember that the hazardous waste rules, it creates a cradle to grave management system. So the liability ultimately falls, a lot of the liability falls on the generating site. So that generating site needs to ensure the proper management beyond once that waste is sent off site. So here's some examples. We can provide example checklists to assist with your review of the regulatory requirements for North Carolina hazardous waste transporters, for North Carolina treatment, storage, and disposal facilities for hazardous waste, and even for used oil processors. So one key aspect of due diligence is identifying the requirements that would apply to a facility, and then ensuring that that facility is in compliance with those. So even though you can review inspections and other documentation, it's important to make your assessment on your own, since there's always a liability to the generator of the hazardous waste. So like I mentioned, we do have checklists for different hazardous waste handlers and used oil types. And there are state-specific, there's North Carolina state-specific requirements for hazardous waste transporters, hazardous waste transfer facilities that some facilities aren't even familiar with. So it's important to take the time to understand what requirements apply to them. There are some requirements that are pretty straightforward, and here's some examples of them. So for instance, hazardous waste may remain at a hazardous waste transfer facility for no more than 10 days. A hazardous waste transporter must maintain 3 years worth of manifests. And then there's some labeling requirements that treatment, storage, and disposal facilities must do. They must label, close, segregate incompatibles. I'm mentioning these because they're kind of considered low-hanging violations. So if a hazardous waste transfer facility or a hazardous waste transporter or treatment, storage, and disposal facility is not even able to comply with the requirements that aren't really hard to comply with, you might want to think twice about working with them. So even when the worst case scenario is not happening, a treatment, storage, and disposal facility, a transporter, a vendor, has issues they need to deal with. So a North Carolina commercial treatment, storage, and disposal facilities, they're inspected very frequently in North Carolina. So these permitted sites are inspected between 2 and 8 times in a month. And we'll see issues that aren't always handled correctly. So here's a couple of examples. There might be bulging containers. There might be shipments that are coming in that had an issue during transportation, and they need to be addressed before they're placed in the storage area. In this particular instance, there was a leak within the container that needed to be addressed. Sometimes there are accidents where waste falls off pallets, or drums are overfilled and they leak during transportation, or they're overfilled at the generating site. It's funny because this label, actually, the generator has this label that's on the waste, and it actually says, do not overfill, leave 3 to 6 inches of headspace. So make sure as a generator you're following your own procedures to keep incidents from happening down the road. So take a look at this container. I want this to soak in for just a second. I want you to take a look at this situation. So in this case, turning the container over may be appropriate for the immediate response to a leak or spill, but only until it can be repackaged or overpacked or pumped out of that container. But if a vendor deals with a leaking container in this way, it's probably something that you need to think twice about dealing with that vendor. So I think in this case, the waste was actually pumped out of this drum into another drum, but it makes me wonder, so this label being placed the way it is, it makes me wonder if it was actually shipped that way. So just some things to look for and to be on the lookout for. The next suggestion is to review documentation and information applicable to that vendor. So we have a lot of publicly accessible information out there, and I would suggest, at a minimum, if you don't go to the site, these are things that you can do to take a look at information that's out there and available to you. So the next slides have lots of links. So remember that this presentation is a handout for you, so you've got access to those links on a PDF document as a handout. So you can request past inspections and reports from the vendor facility, and then confirm these with the documentation that's publicly accessible. This is one way that you can see what information the facility provides you. If they only give you the compliant reports from the past, then that's something to think about as well. So if they only give you the compliance report, think about whether or not they give you all of the compliance history, or if they just send you the stuff where it shows they're in compliance. So I'm going to talk about each of these in a little more depth, but Laserfiche is a publicly accessible Division of Waste Management documents. EPA ECHO, the Enforcement and Compliance History Online, provides information about air, water, and waste. So it is a really useful tool. And then RCRA InfoWeb provides all the federally publicly available information, including electronic manifest, financial assurance, and other publicly accessible information. I'm going to talk about each of these. So here's some information, additional information about Laserfiche and how to navigate on Laserfiche. And that's the publicly accessible documents that the Division of Waste Management has. So there's a couple of links for user guides and other information. And this middle link, this actually provides some information to the Division of Water Resources, Laserfiche. And they also have additional information for sites that are under the regulatory jurisdiction of the Division of Water Resources. Here's what if you run a data request or query in Laserfiche, this is what it looks like. I happen to pick one of our North Carolina permitted treatment, storage, and disposal facilities, and you can find all of their inspection reports, any other information that's relevant to that site. This is the EPA Enforcement and Compliance Online, History Online. So this is the one that provides information on water, air, and hazardous waste management. So you can search by location, where you can give a general location, or by facility name and ID. And then each of these, you'll notice that I put the link on the slide somewhere. It might be at the top, it might be to somewhere on the slide to the left of it. And this is the link to get to the EPA ECHO website. And this is what it looks like. I'm not picking on EcoFlow. It's just a common treatment, storage, and disposal facility. I wanted to use one of the North Carolina sites so you could see what it looks like, but this is the information it'll provide. So you can click on the hyperlink and get more information about the site, but this is some of the information that's available out there. And again, it covers the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and also hazardous waste, and then safe drinking water if any information is available for that. This is a fairly new website. This is the RCRA Info Web. This provides publicly available hazardous waste information that's out there. And you can see these are the categories that are available. Here's the link to get to RCRA Info Web. And here's what you can find. So if you clicked on the e-manifest or electronic manifest, electronic manifests are now available. This didn't used to be available, but they're now available. Since June 30th, 2018, manifests are available to the public 90 days after that manifest is terminated or signed. So this information is now public, and here's how you could search it. So if you search for sites list over here, and then you can, when you're on the sites list, you can type in a name for the site. I happen to type EcoFlow. So here you can change generator if you want to search generating sites, or you can change to the initial transporter or designated facility instead of generator. And then you can give the date range. But this is the type of information that it provides. So it's very general information. It's a summary. You're not actually going to see the signed manifest, but it does provide a summary. So if you click on the hyperlink that's available on that website, it takes you to this type of information. So it's going to show the amount that's transported, a summary of the waste, so the types, the amounts, the dates. Like I said, again, it's not going to look like the hazardous waste manifest that you might be used to, but it does provide some information if you want to take a look at any of these sites. So, and then back to the homepage, there's also information. The other thing that I thought might be interesting to some folks, another feature of the RCRA Info Web is financial assurance. So financial assurance is required only for the permitted sites. So you can check this if you're sending hazardous waste to a commercial treatment, storage, and disposal facility. So it does include other permitted sites in North Carolina that aren't commercial hazardous waste treatment and storage and disposal facilities. So this is an example of what you would see when looking at the financial information. It shows the mechanism, the provider for that financial assurance. So in this case, I searched North Carolina sites, and it showed all of the North Carolina sites that required financial assurance. But you could distill it down into the sites that you're interested in taking a look at. The certificate of recycling, it looks official, but unfortunately, this certificate of recycling or certificate of disposal really doesn't have much meaning. It carries really nothing. So I hate to break the bad news to you, because I know a lot of sites are maintaining these as proof of disposal or recycling. So it looks really nice, but it really has no standing in showing the material was properly managed. So it can be used for other things. It can be used for tracking purposes as far as date shipped, received, amount and type of material, but do be very careful that you can maintain other supporting documentation that would show proper management or recycling or disposal. Here's another aspect for auditing. There are ways to do some internet searches. You wouldn't have to go to the site to do this, but what I would want to do is make sure that these searches did match up with what you were seeing at the site. So I'm going to go into each of these in a little more detail, but here's some suggestions. So Take a look at the Secretary of State website. So for this site, the North Carolina Secretary of State website, to see some information. You can look at the civil penalties tracked by the Hazardous Waste section on their website. There's also the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has compliance information on their website for each transporter. And then review the county GIS and tax websites, looking for things like, is the property owned or leased? Are there taxes that are delinquent? Are there liens on the property that can give you evidence of how that facility is operating? And then finally, other internet searches on the company name, the address, the owner. It might all reveal information about the company. So be sure to check news stories and social media accounts. There's lots of information you can see, lots of information people put on the internet. So look for it. It can be helpful. So here's what the Secretary of State website looks like in North Carolina. Here's the link to that initial page. And what I would suggest is going to business entity search. And in this case, I looked at it. It's now an out of business transporter, but I searched North Star Logistics. If you look at their filings for that entity, here's something that was interesting. In this case, there was a revenue suspension noted within the Secretary of State website. So like I mentioned, North Star Logistics, they're now out of business, and they had an enforcement. So that information actually would have been helpful to some people, I think. So sometimes the annual filing will indicate an issue with the company. Here's the hazardous waste section web page, and up here's the link to this web page. And down here, you can take a look at the civil penalties that have occurred over the years. So we've got them for many, many years. This slide was actually captured probably in 2019, but we also have 2020 and 2021. So you select a year, and then you take a look at all the available enforcement actions for that year. I happened to find this civil penalty. So this was for Trex Properties. Remember that site that I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation? So they had a penalty of $195,000. And then they had to pay some investigative costs. So they had a pretty steep penalty. They had lots of violations. These were some of the violations they got cited for. This was also investigated on the criminal side, and jail time, and it resulted in jail time for some former employees. So that site had a lot of issues. Here is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration website that I mentioned. Here's the link to it. This might be helpful if you're dealing with hazardous waste transporters or other vendors that are transporters. This is on their website. They've got to check motor carrier safety and performance data. And this is what it looks like. So for this, I used Clean Harbors because it's a nationwide company. And something to notice, so again, this was probably pulled in 2019, so they've got more recent data. But take a look at the number of vehicles and the number of drivers. So the number of inspections and number of incidents will be higher just based on the fact that they've got more trucks on the road, more drivers out there. But you can look at any of these units, any of these measures to take a look at how they're operating. But something down here, so it talks about investigations and then total crashes. So again, incidents will happen, but you want to make sure that you're looking at the proportion of vehicles and drivers to incidents, because the more vehicles and drivers you have, of course, there are going to be more incidents. So looking at social media and news is also really important. Here's a news story about there's a mention of a North Carolina hazardous waste transporter in the story. Just a note, it's something that you want to pay attention to. This news story made mention of that transporter. around the same time, but completely separate from that South Carolina incident, there was civil penalties on our website for this same company. So they were assessed a penalty independent of the South Carolina incident. One incident doesn't necessarily indicate a company is not a good one to do business with, but when you see a pattern of issues, you need to pay attention. So that's a good roll in for look for the warning sign. So speaking of paying attention, these are some other things to pay attention to. So here are some categories of some warning flags that I came up with. One of them is complacency. And so if they're not keeping up with changes, like not keeping up with new technology or new regulations, like electronic manifest, if a transporter has no idea what electronic manifest is, that might be a red flag. If they have no focus on customer service, also something of a warning flag. So customer service really is a perk and not a requirement, but it kind of provides an indication of that business practices that they have. It's important to the next category, constant change. It's important to evolve and to change with the times, especially now. The company maybe, but you want to make sure they're not just thriving in their own chaos. Some companies have overextended in the business, like they're just too diverse. They can't do any one thing well, or they might have expanded beyond a service range that's manageable for them. And then my final category, I call it circling the wagons. This is when they have some type of major stuff happening at the site and they're just trying to save what they can. So they might have major layoffs, they might be selling assets, they might have pension buyouts. So one disclaimer though, so these past 2 years have been really unprecedented. So I think a lot of companies have kind of turned to the point where they're having to thrive in the chaos, or they have to circle the wagons just to survive. So sorry about that, a little technical difficulty. So as I was saying, as we know, the past 2 years have been unprecedented, and I think a lot of companies have had to turn to or have ended up thriving in chaos, or they've had to circle the wagons just for to let their business model survive. So if the past 2 years, they just shouldn't have the past 2 years be their regular business model, is what I'm trying to say. So they need to have, if you can look at how they were operating before the past 2 years and how they're operating now, take that with a grain of salt, because things have been very different in the past 2 years. And along those same lines, this was something of a presentation I developed a couple years ago. And when I developed the presentation a couple years ago, this was one of my suggestions to look at as a measure of the waste vendor and how they were doing. So high employee turnover, again, the past 2 years have really been unprecedented, and take this with a grain of salt. But really the point was to take a look at employee change, high turnover in employees. The employee morale plummets with high turnover, and then employees may lack time and experience and training. So that could really affect their safety and their proper management of the materials that you would be sending to them. So that's why I mentioned high employee turnover. Again, that's a hard measure these days, but something to consider. Be sure to ask questions. This is really important. And it's not just asking questions that relate to the environmental compliance at a facility. So there's a lot of information you can gain, a lot of valuable information by asking other questions to gather data. So you want to understand what the corporate culture is like. You want to ask about their hiring, not that you're interested in a job there, but want to see what their response is or how they respond to the questions. So if you found information about an incident online that they're not telling you about, pay attention to that. Incidents will happen. A hazardous waste transporter may have an accident, but having an incident doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't use that hazardous waste transporter or vendor. You want to determine whether the incident is routine or is it a pattern? Was the incident preventable? So those are some of the questions that you want to ask. So how do they respond to the incident is really important. So like I said, incidents happen, the response really matters. Here are the questions that you could ask about incidents. Was it a routine incident? Is there a pattern? Was it preventable? Was it due to neglect, or are they at fault for it? How did they respond or react? Did they follow up doing training? What did they do? What did they do to ensure it wouldn't happen again? So those are some things to consider. This auditing technique is another one that I think is important, and it's basically see what you see, but this means that you would have to go to the site. But it's important, I think, to lay your eyes on the site, because often this is the type of photo that you might see online or in a brochure or on a website. But sometimes, in fact, this is what the site might actually look like. So it doesn't actually represent what is happening at the site itself. People taking shortcuts or being frugal is not always an indication of financial problems, but it can be. So maintenance and purchasing are typically stopped or delayed when money's in short supply. Physically seeing a facility can sometimes help make decisions on whether to use a vendor. So in this particular case, the facility was accepting hazardous secondary materials and non-hazardous materials for use in ingredients as a product. So these unlabeled cubic yard sacks were being used as a product. But the thing I really want you to note here is the collapsing roof in the background. So the owner of this site is saying that all of this material is usable, but really he's not managing it or managing the site like it is a usable product. It seems more waste-like. These bags of sodium sulfate were in standing water in the warehouse. So some other things that you can actually see if you go to the site. Floors in the building are made out of concrete, but when a drum started to leak, the site piled dirt up in the building as secondary containment instead of locating and managing the leaking drum. So other big warning flags when you go to a site. And then the opposite can happen. This was a paint recycler. So often when you go to a site, there might be a staged area for visitors to see. And this one in particular was extremely clean and tidy. This is one of those staged facilities. So just remember, because we're going to talk about this one again. So just remember this site. But this site recycled unused paint that contractors and other businesses no longer needed. So they were taking paint from contractors. Each of these totes was used to store an individual color or pigment of the paint. The paint was processed to separate it out. It was filtered by color into each of these totes. The empty cans were very neatly stacked so they could be reused. They were cleaned and set up for reuse. And then finally, the empty paint cans that couldn't be reused were staged to dry out prior to being put in the trash. So extremely tidy, very organized. It was a sign of a very pristine operation. But yeah, we're going to talk about this again in a minute. So here's some tips on seeing what you see. So as part of seeing what you see, take a look at the building maintenance. And again, I know there might be money that's being diverted from maintenance and landscaping and some other stuff that needs to be spent on more important things at this point. But sometimes building maintenance, especially if it's deferred maintenance, like roof repairs that are very expensive, might be a sign that the site is struggling. So look to see if equipment is operable. Landscaping is more superficial, but a lot of times if it's being maintained really well, that site might be detail oriented. It might be, or they have a good landscaping contractor, who knows. But look to see if vehicles are maintained, especially safety equipment. Is it new? Is it at least up to date? Is the facility secure? That's pretty important for your waste, to make sure it's secured. And also, when you're on site, talk to the employees that are on site. Ask if they like their job. Ask if what training they've gotten. Ask how long they've worked there. There's some questions that you can gather information to be armed with data about that vendor. So I want to send out a word of caution. There's certain materials that you want to be very cautious when dealing with. One of them is cathode ray tube glass from old computers and TV monitors. Now, hopefully there's not much of this out there in the world anymore, but it's very expensive to dispose of properly. Extreme caution should be taken when working with vendors of these. If you have any of the old cathode ray tube monitors or TVs that you're dealing with. In this case, a company named Creative Recycling went bankrupt and left 4 million pounds of this cathode ray tube glass in a facility in Durham, and another 4 million pounds of the same CRT glass in a warehouse in Guilford County. It wasn't until a disgruntled employee at the Durham site let us know that there was also this Guilford County warehouse that was full of this cathode ray tube glass. The warehouse space was leased, so the property owner was the one who had to spend the money to dispose of the waste because Creative Recycling went bankrupt. Something important to note, Creative Recycling, at the time this was happening, they had an R2 certification, and they were also ISO 14001, they had the industry certification. So this one's tricky because we didn't even know about these warehouses. So it's sometimes really hard to be audited. It's hard to be on the generator side of this business. There's a lot of liability. Here's an example of a complaint. A handyman doing odd jobs at a lighting business said he would take care of these used fluorescent lamps. He took them to the landfill, where the landfill turned him away because the landfill can't accept lamps. So he found an abandoned piece of property right next to the landfill and dumped the lamps on the property. So the interesting thing is the name of the company where the lamps originated was still on the box, and the property actually had wildlife cameras. So the camera picked up the license plate of the vehicle that dumped the lamps. The police tracked down the person who actually dumped the lamps. The lamps were and actually the person who dumped the lamps and the company that sent them for disposal we followed up with them. And they actually not only had to clean it up, but to pay an enforcement fee. So lamps are notoriously mismanaged. Often they're placed in a dumpster, which causes the dumpster to be contaminated with mercury. Also, lamp crushers are sometimes mismanaged. So a word of caution, there are equipment companies out there that will let you rent a bulb crusher. So be very careful, because that could be contaminated with someone else's hazardous waste and you're taking it on your property to crush lamps. So another word of wisdom is the lamp crushers are not all created the same. This was a homemade lamp crusher. It had a leaf blower fan blade that was, you put the lamps in and it would crush it, and then it would drop down into this open container. There are vendors that will come to your site and crush lamps and then take the drum with them to another site. So if you're doing any of these activities with this risky or high risk material, make sure that you're using people, if you're using a vendor that is operating in compliance. Empty containers can also cause an issue. A man offered to take the empty metal drums from a facility because he wanted to turn them into grills. Once he got them home, he found that there was still enough solvents in the drum, so they weren't actually empty. They did not meet the RCRA empty standard. He ended up pouring the solvent that remained in those containers in his backyard. And the name of the company who had the drums was on the container. So remember, the liability for this waste never ends. And I have one more example of a site And I just wanted to talk about this site really quickly. We're on the home stretch. So this one site, the property owner reported the drums were being brought to the property by the man who leased the property. The man leasing the property claimed he was planning on conducting an experiment using, these are mostly non-hazardous, but they were soaps and detergent and body washes. He wanted to use them as fertilizers. There were approximately 1,000 drums and 100 chemical totes that were being stored on this property in various locations throughout the property. And then they were also on, so here's some of the pictures of the thousands of drums and totes. And then the leasee also took them to his house, and he had about 80 drums that he stored at his house and claimed that he could use them. But when asked where they originated from, the leasee said, well, I got them from the former Bristol-Myers Squibb warehouse in Kenley. So this material was tracked to that warehouse, and this warehouse is 193,000 square feet. There were thousands of drums with similar labeling as the previous properties. The drums at the warehouse were observed both indoors and outdoors, and some of the containers were observed in tractor trailer that was parked on the loading dock. So here's some more pictures of that. The lots of cardboard containers were being stored outside and exposed to rain, so they were degrading. A lot of the material inside, there were some leaking containers. Again, a lot of this was non-hazardous, or was labeled non-hazardous. However, some of it was actually hazardous secondary materials. You can see here, it was hazardous secondary material that was going to the site with the intent of being used in a product, but it never was recycled. So because it was abandoned, this was hazardous waste. So labels on the containers indicated where the material originated from, and it resulted in the company having to pay twice to dispose of this. So they had paid the vendor to use this as a material in a product, and then also had to pay to dispose of this, unfortunately. So some more pictures. This warehouse was just full of material. Some of it was leaking. A lot of the containers were not in good condition. This one was severely rusted out. All of these had severe corrosion. The condition of the containers were not good. There was bulging containers, lots of bulging containers on the inside of the building. And this is where, remember this site, the person that owned this pristine paint recycling company. So at the time, this person was saying they were operating this paint recycling business, but this is where the paint actually was ending up. So this was a racket where they were getting money on the front end to take this paint and reuse it, but it actually was just filling up a warehouse. So this is a really bad case scenario, worst case scenario for management of materials and mismanagement of materials. So I'm on the home stretch. Be cautious when using brokers. Use them at their own use a broker at your own risk. Brokers have no liability at all. They have no regulations they have to meet. They are just managing your waste. And if something goes wrong, there's no regulatory requirements that apply. There's no liability that they would need to fulfill. So be cautious if you go after the lowest bid by any vendor. So just proceed at your own caution with that. And then finally, the final tip is to trust your instincts. Do not solely rely on your instincts. You do need to you need to review and do research. If something the facility or vendor is saying doesn't match up with what you're seeing, then something isn't right and you'll need to dig deeper. So sometimes instinct and intuition picks up on odd or unusual or out of place things or statements. So do pay attention to those instincts or spidey senses and when they kick in. So you need to pay attention to that and follow up on it. So sometimes stuff happens. So like I mentioned, incidents happen. Here's one mechanism that's available in dealing with them. So if you have a vendor that does something and the liability is going to fall on the generating site. Here's some information. We do have a self-confessor policy. It's for self-reporting violations for hazardous waste. So this was a policy that was created in 2000. A facility must meet all 5 conditions and submit information in writing to be considered for a penalty rate waiver. In all circumstances, even if the 5 conditions are met, recovery of the economic benefit may be pursued. If the penalty is not waived, the facility is subject to the cost of the penalty. And then here's the conditions, the 5 conditions. The deficiency was not due to a lack of good faith effort to understand or comply with the environmental regulations. The deficiency was not done knowingly or willfully. The deficiency did not cause a significant harm to the environment or risk to human health. The regulated person or entity voluntarily and promptly notifies the department. And then finally, the regulated person or entity, upon discovering the deficiency, takes immediate and effective action to correct it. So last couple slides, here are the guidance documents. If you want to take a look, we do have some of those checklists on our website. We also have additional guidance documents. There's a document for the self-reported violations policy that you can take a look at, and it outlines the policy. So in case you ever do think that you might want to use it, you can take a look at it. There's information about hazardous waste generator, universal waste, aerosol cans, used oil, lots of other topics at this link on our website. And then finally, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And then also remember your local hazardous waste inspectors. They're a great resource. They can offer information. They can answer site-specific questions. And that is all I have right now. So thank you very much. That was a lot of information. Are there any questions?
Hi, Jenny. Yes, and great presentation as usual. We do have a question. What are your thoughts on oversight services like CHUMEG? I believe I'm pronouncing it. They manage waste vendors. I believe I'm a little familiar with them, but the acronym is CHEW-ILMEG.
Right. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I have any thoughts on that. I think, again, anytime, so remember that the ultimate liability comes down to the generating site. If you have good faith in that type of auditing system and auditing company, make sure you audit them. But I don't know if I could speak directly to that, but it's again, it's someone that doesn't have liability. So it's something to consider when using a resource like that.
Much appreciated. And you've got some shout outs on a great presentation as well. So
Well, it's a lot more fun to do something, to give a presentation not about regulations and requirements. So remember, again, it's all recommendations. And certainly if you all have ideas or thoughts, I would love to hear about them, and I'll take a look at the chat and see what folks have said.
okay. And right now, got another shout out for a great presentation. So yeah. And if anybody would like to speak instead of keyboarding in, you feel free to raise your hand as well, and we can put you on. Right now, that's about it.
I think everyone wants to eat lunch.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. And if you do have any questions, please reach out.
Oh, definitely.
Thank you, Jenny. It's always
Thank you.
great information that you provide for our members. You also help us out when they have compliance questions, where we'll send them off to you and you provide an answer, and we strip off the identifying info and share it with everyone. So great community for submitting those questions. And we work closely with hazardous waste section of the Division of Waste Management, especially on what we've been calling our hazardous materials roundtables. We've been kicking around some ideas for next year, so keep an eye out either on our website, we'll put it up there, or you'll get our constant contacts, or put it on the listserv. But if you have any requests for things you'd like us to reach out and cover with a partner, let us know. And I'm just taking one last question. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. So we'll break for the morning. This afternoon, we'll start back up. Remember, that's at 1:30 using the same link that you logged in this morning with. And we'll see you then. Have a great lunch.